Sure.
So as I mentioned, I am a senior this year at Georgetown, and I'm completing my degree in Jewish civilization as part of the new Center for Jewish Civilization. And my thesis topic that I'm writing is on the history of Jews at Georgetown. So I'm really trying to go from 1789 up until today and cover all the different manifestations of that, including what it's been like to be a Jew on campus over time, the changes in the Jewish population, anti-Semitism or lack thereof, Jewish studies, Jewish spiritual life. So I guess it would be great to start by hearing just about you and your, why you chose to go to Georgetown, your experience there as a student. And I do have some questions for you, but you probably have more to say than I would know to ask about. So probably, I guess if you start speaking, that's just the best way.
All right, sure. So I don't even know, what you know about me. Class of 81, School of Foreign Service. Although I actually graduated in December 80.
Okay.
And I grew up in New Jersey, and I wound up at Georgetown really almost kind of, not exactly against my will, but it's not something that I would have thought of. Strongly interested in law, political science, international relations. Back then, there was this thing called the B'nai B'rith College Counseling Service. So I went there. And, my strongest interest was Princeton, but I didn't get in. And my advisor said I had, schools that I was applying to. He said, you should apply to Georgetown, too. And I said, I can't go to Georgetown. It's a Catholic school. And he said, well, you know what? Just apply. Okay. If you get in, you can explore it more. The fact that you're applying doesn't mean you have to go there. Just apply. So, I just did what he said. So I applied. And then, Princeton was my number one choice. I grew up in New Jersey. I think colleges were somewhat less competitive back then. So Rutgers was my safe school. I mean, I don't think anybody would choose Rutgers as a safe school today, but Rutgers was my safe school. And then the competitive schools that I got into were Georgetown and Brandeis. And I visited Brandeis and I really didn't like it. And so then I visited Georgetown and I met with Rabbi White. And I liked it, and I became convinced that, it would be okay. And there's no doubt, I mean, the course of my life was really set in motion by Georgetown. I don't think that I would have become a rabbi, had I wound up at Brandeis.
Wow.
So it's just an incredible thing. And I do, so when you emailed me, I said, for sure, because I want to give back to Georgetown as much as I can in any way that I can.
Oh, well, that's awesome. I from so many people I've talked to, it's a similar story of and I'm certainly for myself, of being kind of hesitant and not really necessarily meaning to end up at Georgetown and then having such a good experience.
Yeah.
So what was it? So you decided to come, you arrived on campus. What was it like being Jewish? Did you seek out a community right away, or did you sort of get drawn into it accidentally?
No, I did seek out a community. I mean, my Jewishness was very different back then than it is today. I mean, I grew up Reformed. I was active in my Temple Youth group. I was active in BBYO. I wasn't particularly observant, so I wasn't seeking out kosher food or anything like that. I did get involved. I wasn't really that involved in the Jewish Student Association. I did go to services. I actually pretty quickly became not involved in Jewish life. And actually, I mean, the main Jewish influences on me were not Jewish. They were they were Jesuits. my main sort of extracurricular was writing for the Hoya.
Mm-hmm.
And, things were so different back then. But anyway, there was supposed to be a speech in Gaston Hall by the PLO representative to the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the folks involved in the Jewish Student Association tried to sabotage the speech by making up flyers that said that the speech had been rescheduled when it hadn't been.
Okay.
I discovered who had done it, and wrote an article for the Hoya.
Mm-hmm.
And then somebody vandalized my dorm room door. And it was a long time ago, but Rabbi White wasn't particularly supportive
Of you
me,
or of the?
of me. And so I pretty much dropped out of Jewish life at Georgetown. I guess I still went to services sometimes. I did. I mean, I spent my junior year at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, so it didn't impact my Jewish interest or awareness, but I wasn't that involved in the organized Jewish community until my senior year after I'd come back from Jerusalem.
And so was that a formal study abroad opportunity, or you sought that out and then got approval for it separately?
Yeah, no, it was not. I mean, Georgetown had a program. They had a semester-long program at Tel Aviv University at the time, and they had another program. Now, this was right after, literally the year that I was there, 79-80, was the year that the land border between Israel and Egypt opened.
Oh.
So they had a program where you spent a semester in Cairo and a semester in Jerusalem.
Wow.
But I just wanted to go to Jerusalem. So so I did it directly through the university, through the Hebrew University rather than through Georgetown, which was great because instead of paying Georgetown tuition, I was paying Hebrew University tuition, which was way, way cheaper. But I had to get permission, and it was a little bit complicated because you had to justify why you wanted to do this and why none of the existing Georgetown programs met your needs. So I had a self-designed concentration within humanities and international affairs, which was religion and international affairs. And, it's really interesting because at the time, everybody said, what, religion and international affairs? What is that? What is that? And today, it's so self-evident. But back then, it wasn't self-evident. So I had to, it was a lot of hoops to jump through. I asked Father Walsh in the theology department, who was Father Walsh was really my mentor. And stayed my mentor until his death about 3 years ago. So I asked for him to be my advisor, which had to be approved by the dean because he wasn't on the SFS faculty. So the dean approved Father Walsh's petition to be my advisor, and then he signed off on me doing this program in Jerusalem.
I've talked to some people who were at Georgetown in the early 70s, right as Jewish life was getting started and Rabbi White was new, but I haven't talked to anyone who was there during your student period of time where you were a student. Can you sketch for me to the extent that you remember, what Jewish life, what the outline of it was? So there was the house, but who was living there and how was it being used? And then were there services on Fridays, and were there kosher? What did Jewish life look like? Okay,
so there was the house, which was on N Street, I guess. And I don't know. I don't know how it was picked to live there. Probably people who kept kosher because it was the only kosher kitchen on campus. There were services, I think, every Friday night. I'm not actually sure whether it was every Friday or every other Friday.
Mm-hmm.
High holiday services in Gaston.
Mm-hmm.
Rabbi White was full-time.
Mm-hmm. And he had just become full-time a few years before you got there,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. I'm not sure exactly when, but maybe 76, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Because what's interesting is that I subsequently became the Hillel director at American University.
Oh, wow.
And Rabbi White was originally the Hillel director at AU.
Mm-hmm.
And then Georgetown approached Hillel or AU or him, I'm not sure exactly. And he was half-time at Georgetown and half-time at AU.
Mm-hmm.
And then he gave up AU and became full-time at Georgetown.
So your perception is he started 100% at AU, then he became half and half, and then he became 100% at Georgetown.
Correct.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure that's accurate.
Okay.
There were a lot of activity. I mean, it wasn't the kind of place at the time. It's interesting. So my wife and I have season tickets for basketball, although we, wind up selling half of the tickets on StubHub because the games are on Shabbat.
Mm-hmm.
But we went to the game last Wednesday night, and the national anthem was sung by a 4-person a cappella group. I don't remember what the name of the group was, but one of the kids was wearing a kippah. That would have been unheard of when I was a student. There were the most observant person at Georgetown probably at my time there was my classmate David Abramowitz, who is the son of Rabbi Nathan Abramowitz, who's the emeritus rabbi at Tiferet Israel.
Mm-hmm.
But there was nobody on campus who, wore a kippah regularly or who wouldn't, eat vegetarian food at the cafeteria or something like that.
Why? Because those students that were religious wouldn't have chosen to come to Georgetown, or you felt like it was uninviting for them?
Well, I don't really know because I wasn't one of them. I think, look, part of that is that you need a community.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's not a community, then, life gets very lonely, I think.
Did you sense at the time, there were more Jews in the SFS and the college, that there were more Jews from, was there any profile to the Jewish community? There were more Jews from the Northeast than elsewhere? I don't know.
I don't really know either. I think that I remember many, many times, although I can't cite to you a specific example, discovering that another student who you had known for a while was also Jewish, and oh, you're Jewish too. It wasn't people didn't try to hide that they were Jewish, but they didn't walk around advertising it either. It wasn't, and I would not say that it was unfriendly to Jews. It just wasn't a place with a large Jewish community. Father Healy, who was the president at the time, was very pro-Jewish. He returned large donations from both Libya and Iraq. He was from New York City. And there's something about New York and Jews, I think. You're from San Francisco. I know I Googled you, but so he was very, very pro-Jewish. In fact, I remember he got, really strongly criticized because he was the one, I assume it's still probably in place, that at campus-wide events, benedictions and invocations could not be Christian. They had to be just God, not Jesus, not Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
And Father Healy put that policy in place
Father
while you were
Healy
there.
put that policy into place. So he clearly, wanted Georgetown to be a place that was comfortable for Jews. But I just don't think it wasn't. I don't know. There just wasn't a large Jewish community, and I think again, it's sort of a chicken egg situation. I mean, if you're observant, you want to be in a place where there's an observant community.
Did you get the sense that there were other, did you bring Muslim students or Hindu students, or was it really just Catholics, Protestants, and Jews?
There were some Muslims. I mean, there was an organized Muslim group. There were Friday prayers. But I mean, it's interesting. So when I got back from Israel, I went to summer school because if I took a couple of summer classes, I could graduate a semester early because I picked up extra credits in Israel and whatnot. And so I took a class in, I don't remember, it was a foreign service class taught by the visiting Israeli professor. And one of the other students in the class was Egyptian. And we became really good friends and wound up living together senior year. And now he was, I mean, like many of the students at Georgetown, I mean, he was Egyptian, although he had lived very little of his life in Egypt because his father was a member of the Egyptian diplomatic corps. So Hisham had spent his early teens in London and then his later teens in Nicaragua, where his dad was the Egyptian ambassador. So he was Muslim, but only sort of nominally so. I mean, I don't think, there weren't, just like there weren't too many observant Jews, there weren't too many observant Muslims, to my knowledge.
And was there any formal, pro-Israel or anti-Israel groups or stuff that went on?
Sure. I mean, there was a pro-Israel group. I mean, it came and went, I think.
And that was a distinct group that would have been separate from the JSA.
Well, it would have been like a part of or subgroup of, I think.
Do you remember, any controversies or incidents? I mean, you mentioned the PLO story.
Well, there was that one thing. I don't really remember. I mean, the big sort of Israel-related controversies were more university-wise, the Iraq donation, the Libya donation, certainly still charges that, the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies was anti-Semitic and blah, 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 blah. That probably hasn't changed. But there was no Center for Jewish Civilization, although there was already a visiting Israeli professor, which is what actually morphed into the Center for Jewish Civilization eventually.
It didn't start in 1979. Well, I guess I have it written down somewhere, but it would have started when you were a student.
The visiting Israeli professor? Yeah, for sure. I mean, I had a course with the visiting Israeli professor in the summer of 80. So for sure it existed by then. When it started, I'm not exactly sure.
So what do you mean when you say that your most Jewish influence came from the Jesuits on campus?
Okay, so Father Walsh really, like I said, it was my mentor. I mean, he was my Rebbe. I became a rabbi primarily because of him, but also because of some other faculty members that I met, most of whom were Irish Catholics, interestingly. I mean, including some lay professors as well. but I think through Father Walsh, I learned, I don't know how to put this exactly, but that religion, if taken seriously, could really be a force for good and for social progress and for, tikkun olam, not like in the stereotypical sense of the word, but really for making the world into the kind of place that God intends for it to be.
Mm-hmm.
And that there was no contradiction between being religious and being intellectual. There was no contradiction between being religious and being fully a participant in the world.
Mm-hmm.
There was no contradiction between being steeped in your own tradition and yet deeply respectful of other traditions. And he really, and we became extraordinarily close. As I said, he was my advisor who allowed me to go to Jerusalem. When I decided to become a rabbi, it freaked out both of my parents. And by then my parents were divorced, but both of them came down to DC, and Father Walsh sort of calmed them. And I hadn't flipped out, I hadn't gone crazy.
Mm-hmm.
This was a respectable career for a nice Jewish boy. He came to Cincinnati for my ordination. He came to Atlanta for my wedding, spoke at my wedding. Although actually spoke after the wedding because the rabbi who did it wouldn't let him speak during the wedding. When I was installed in my current position in Gaithersburg, he came to participate in the ceremony here. He was really, like I say, he was my Rebbe.
And this is Father Jim Walsh, right?
Father Jim Walsh, yeah.
I need to look at my notes, but someone I spoke with also mentioned him. Did you get the sense that he was particularly Jewish oriented or there for Jewish students, or was it really just you and him?
No, I did get that sense. First of all, his PhD was in Hebrew scriptures.
Oh.
Okay, from Harvard.
Mm-hmm.
So, his Hebrew was impeccable. And of course he knew, 30 million different languages, but,
Mm-hmm.
But he always insisted in his classes that students should learn important Hebrew terms, right? Mm-hmm. He said, the Bible doesn't say justice and mercy. It says tzedek and it says chesed,
mm-hmm.
right? And he would, insist that students learn certain Hebrew terms. He would insist that the Tanakh stood on its own, that as much as Christians saw it as prefiguring the New Testament, that the New Testament writers had the Tanakh in front of them and were writing it to, sort of show a symmetry that wasn't what the original authors intended. Mm-hmm. So he really, I think, stood up for the integrity of the Jewish tradition, and people always felt respected by him. Mm-hmm. So I know that there were a lot of Jewish students who were really close to him, particularly later on when he became involved with the Chimes and so on. At the same time, he spent two semesters in Qatar after the SFS opened. So, it wasn't like he was some sort of secret Zionist or anything. He also, had great relationships with Muslim students. Mm-hmm. But, I do think his Hebrew and, his respect for the integrity of the Jewish scriptures, marked him off as somebody that Jewish students could sort of trust, I think. Mm-hmm. it was also, I mean, he told me one funny story. I mean, he told me a million stories, but one where Georgetown gave an honorary degree to Chaim Herzog,
Mm-hmm.
who had been, he was, I don't know, maybe even at the time, he was the president of Israel.
Right.
And Herzog was born in Dublin when his father was the chief rabbi of Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
So they invited Jim to give the benediction. And of course, Herzog, I mean, born in Dublin. So here's this, Irish priest coming up to give the benediction, not a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
But when Jim gave it in Hebrew,
Mm-hmm.
Herzog, like, he's bowing his head now. So he was really special.
Wow, that's a great story. So you stayed close with Father Walsh for many years, and you were involved at AU. So I imagine you sort of were within the Georgetown orbit it sounds like for many years after you graduated.
Sure.
Or maybe it's still are. I don't want to assume I don't know. Or I guess certainly are if you go to basketball games.
Less so since Jim died,
Mm-hmm.
because he was like my main tie. I mean, he was the reason that I would come to campus pretty much. I mean, there were things like 7 or 8 years ago, there was a big consultation of Catholic theologians. This was probably 7 or 8 years ago because Benedict was still the Pope. But there was this consultation essentially on how Catholics ought to teach about Jews and Judaism.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a Catholic consultation, but they invited some Jews to sort of observe and, give advice and whatever. And Jim made sure that I was one of the people invited to participate in this consultation.
This was at Georgetown?
It was at Georgetown. It was in Riggs Library, as a matter of fact. It was sponsored by the president's office. But the president, I mean, Jack DeGioia was my RA freshman year. So,
oh, wow.
We go back a long time too.
So what are your thoughts then? Maybe this is a tough question to answer, but what are the initial thoughts that come to mind when I just ask you sort of how you would frame the development of Jewish life in the decades since you've graduated? I mean, I know like Rabbi White was there until 2010 and then Rabbi Rachel Gardner took over in 2011, but like, do you feel like there were moments at which the Jewish population was growing or declining, and there were moments or periods of time at which it was the community was stronger or less strong on campus? Or do you feel as though Father O'Donovan had less or greater or equal of a commitment to Judaism as Father Healy and President DeGioia?
Yeah. I don't really know that I can answer that. I mean, I haven't been intimately involved. I mean, it was always weird because, I mean, and it's fascinating because especially when Rabbi White died a couple of years ago, and people know my love of Georgetown, know I'm a rabbi, sort of assume that Rabbi White had something to do with that.
Mm-hmm.
And he did in a way, because I think I would not have been comfortable ab initio going to Georgetown had he not been there.
Mm-hmm.
But we were never close. And, even in later years, because this is nothing really to do with Georgetown per se, but because he had been the Jewish chaplain at AU, AU continued to allow him to rent out the K Spiritual Life Center chapel
Mm-hmm.
to do mixed marriages. And I'm a conservative rabbi, and I put a stop to that. I said, look, he was the rabbi here 20 years ago. It doesn't give him, he's not a chaplain here anymore. I'm the chaplain. So my participation in sort of like the nitty-gritty of Jewish life at Georgetown was not that strong because Rabbi White and I didn't really get along that well. I mean, I didn't hate him for sure, but we were not close, and we had very different visions of what it means to be a rabbi. Although the one thing that I did initiate the idea of having Friday night services during alumni reunions, which was interesting because I actually conducted the last Shabbat service in the Jewish Life townhouse that was on 36th Street.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Yeah. Which was interesting because before it was the Jewish townhouse, some friends of mine lived there, and I said, God, if people knew how much dope I had smoked in this house, wouldn't have believed it.
So was it next to, I'm trying to figure out exactly where it was. I have an address that has been attached to it, but that's right now where the Black House is. Was it next to the Black House?
I don't know. It was like a couple doors down from the alumni house.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so you led the last service that was there because
it was my 30th. That's my 30th. 81. Yeah. I guess my 30th reunion. And they were always, there was Catholic Mass on Sunday, and there was even a Protestant service. And I wrote to them and I said, there ought to be a Jewish Shabbat service too. And, I'll be happy to conduct it.
Totally.
Yeah.
So did you graduate Georgetown and go directly into rabbinical school?
More or less. I mean, I graduated in December 80 and started rabbinical school in September of 81. So, there was a bit of a gap, but for all intents and purposes, yeah.
Sorry, pardon me. I'm just going to plug in somewhere else. Sorry, pardon me.
Kind of losing you.
At all the different DC campuses.
Oh, I lost you for about 30 seconds there. So.
Oh, no problem. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
When you were Hillel director at AU, I guess what years were that? And was there connection between different Jewish leadership at the different DC campuses?
Yeah. So I was the Hillel director at AU from 91 to 95. Yeah. And there were definitely, the Hillel directors meetings, Rabbi White usually came. And there were multi-campus programs. I mean, I remember one year everybody did Purim at AU, and, certainly Georgetown came as well as GW, and I guess it was Georgetown, GW, AU, and maybe Goucher. So yeah, there was inter-campus programming.
And now you're at Conservative Synagogue in Gaithersburg, right?
Correct.
How long have you been there?
It's my 6th year here.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Are you, Debbie Reichman had also put me in touch with Ian Pear, Rabbi Ian Pear in Israel. I don't know if you know him. Are there is there like a community of rabbis from Georgetown in the area?
Not really. I mean, I know some other rabbis. The only other person from my year who is a rabbi to my knowledge became a Baal Teshuvah, and he's the assistant Chabad rabbi at the University of Pennsylvania.
Wow.
He was certainly not a Chabadsker when I was there. But, I know of some other Georgetown alumni rabbis. I actually tried to put together a Facebook group of Georgetown alumni rabbis, but it didn't really go anywhere.
Rabbi White had always said apparently that there were 30 was the number that I guess got used. 30 people that had gone to Georgetown and ended up joining the rabbinate. I don't know if that he just sort of felt like that was the number, or if he was tracking it.
I heard the same number. I mean, I think that the alumni association was trying to keep track, or maybe the development office, as a way of raising money for Jewish life at Georgetown. It wouldn't strike. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me because, I mean, the specifics of my story may be unique. But the overall outline, I think, is not. That people who got a different and more sophisticated view at Georgetown of what it means to be a Jew. And I'll tell you that certainly, what I learned at Georgetown. I mean, I had an okay GPA at Georgetown, but I breezed through rabbinical school. Georgetown was much, much tougher. But also, like, some of the things that I had learned in the, required courses in philosophy, repeated in rabbinical school, and, was able to do really well and stuff like that. So it definitely, stood me in good stead.
Was there any, I was speaking with a woman who graduated in 75, I think, and she was saying that there were some, at the time that she was a student, there were some professors who would require like the Lord's Prayer and other Catholic things in classes, and some who wouldn't. By the time you were on campus, would there have ever been Catholic requirements?
No. I mean, I think, Father Healy would have put a stop to that. There was, I mean, having said that, I mean, I think like this would be the far spectrum. So my section of Problem of God was taught by Father Thomas Wynandy, who was a Franciscan priest, not a Jesuit, and he was a charismatic Catholic. Okay, I don't even know if you know what that is.
I don't know.
They're like kind of Pentecostalists, but Catholic, okay, like holy roller type people. And he offered people extra credit if they went to one of his group services. But it wasn't required, but it was extra credit. I mean, it was interesting because he subsequently became a fairly well-known conservative theologian, and he was in the news within the last couple of months because he was always like he became an official of the U.S. Catholic Bishops Conference, like one of their top theological enforcers, and was always going after theologians who criticized the Pope. And then he criticized the Pope for being too liberal. And so he was forced out. But on the other hand, so I did have Jan Karski for one course.
Oh, wow.
And Karski was the only professor who proactively recorded his classes on Jewish holidays. And, before he would say, if you're Jewish and you're not coming, go to the dean's office. There will be tapes of my class. And I didn't know about everything that he had done during the Holocaust and whatever. So it was, a little bit surprising that this Polish professor went out of his way to make sure that the Jewish students were taken care of.
Wow. So did anyone know about his story at that point?
Some people did, apparently, but I didn't know until I was in rabbinical school, because that was when the movie Shoah came out with his interview.
Wow. Sorry, that down. And that was Walter Lacour. I don't know, Lacour, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. Was a Georgetown professor and was involved in like unveiling Karski's story, wasn't he? He narrated the film, maybe.
Perhaps, I don't know. I mean, I had him senior year too for a seminar.
Was it evident that he was Jewish?
Oh yeah. I mean, he wrote. He was. One of the classic historians of Zionism. I mean, everybody. Yeah, absolutely.
So can you sorry, I'm jumping around here. Can you tell me a little bit more about this 7 or 8 years ago, this consultation in Riggs. I'm wondering, I haven't heard about that yet. Is there anyone around on campus who had organized it who might still be here that I could ask? Or, I mean, or did you, I guess I should preface that. Do you think if I'm telling this story of Jews at Georgetown, is this an important event? And if so, then who do you think I should speak with about it?
Yeah, I think it's worth talking about because it shows. I mean, essentially, so like the sort of like common perception is that vis-a-vis Jews and Judaism and the Catholic Church, there was the John Paul agenda, and then there was the Benedict agenda. Okay, and the John Paul agenda was like very pro-Jewish, and then Benedict tried to pull it back, and now Francis is pushing it forward again. Right? I don't know if it's 100% accurate, but it's not like inaccurate either. And so this conference was an attempt to sort of get the church back to the John Paul agenda and away from the Benedict agenda. All right. So in some ways you could say it's an internal Catholic matter, but in other ways, you know, how does the Catholic Church teach about Jews and Judaism is not only an internal Catholic matter.
Sure.
So yeah, hold on a second. Let me do a quick search in my emails and see, because I don't remember the name of the guy who organized it, but I can find it real quickly.
Oh, thank you. It would have been John Borelli, maybe?
It was Borelli.
Oh, great.
It was Borelli, yeah. So you can talk, is he still around?
Yeah, he's an advisor to the president on dialogue or something.
Yeah. Well, he was then too. So yeah, so John is the one who organized it, and he could tell you more for sure.
Oh, awesome. Is there anything I haven't asked about that has come to mind as we've been chatting, or that you think might be important?
You know, it's interesting. I mean, you know, people are still sometimes surprised to find out that I'm a Georgetown alum. When I did admissions interviews for a long time, I stopped doing them because it was too heartbreaking. I mean, literally, I mean, you know, you would meet every year 10 amazing, wonderful kids, and you would write 10 amazing, wonderful recommendations, and then none of them would get in.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm just wasting my time. So I stopped doing it. But I did notice, especially, you know, less so here, but when I lived in sort of more rural areas, like I moved here from Norwich, Connecticut, that's like the New England Milltown part of Connecticut, not the wealthy New York suburb part of Connecticut. And I would get, you know, a lot of Jewish kids and a lot of Muslim kids. And I suspect that was intentional, because both Jewish parents and Muslim parents might be hesitant about, you know, allowing their kid to go to a Catholic school.
I mean, you think that it was sort of, they were connected to you by someone in the Alumni Association who thought
sure.
that, or admissions.
Yeah, I believe so. Because I don't think assignments are just random.
Yeah.
You know, so, you know, I just have this, I do feel that Georgetown gave me a tremendous gift, and I try to steer people there as much as I can. I mean, even like yesterday, our men's club here at the synagogue, Rich Shavatkin was our guest speaker. He's the guy, Rich Shavatkin does Georgetown basketball on the radio.
Oh, okay.
And has since 1974. He's done over 1,400 games.
And he's Jewish.
And he's Jewish. Yeah.
Do you think he'd be someone that would be good to reach out to?
For sure.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure you can reach him through the athletic department.
Yeah, totally. And do you feel, there's a lot of different. I mean, we don't know exactly how many Jewish students there are on campus today. Right. Everyone says it's like a few hundred, maybe it's 6 to 8%. Do you feel like that seems to have been consistent with what it was when you were a student in the years since then?
No, my sense is that the community has grown in numbers. I mean, when I was there, I mean, people were throwing around a figure of 2 to 5%. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that was accurate, but to this day, frankly, I mean, because of the wonders of Facebook, right, where you reconnect with people or even connect with people for the first time. I mean, there are people who were my classmates who I barely knew, who now I know either through Facebook or through reunion. Mm-hmm. And like people, for example, so that people, high profile Jewish people, there was certainly nobody when I was around who had the first name Ari, for example, mm-hmm. right? I mean, everybody knows you're Jewish. Ari Goldstein, there's no doubt that you're Jewish, right? I mean, my name is not necessarily a Jewish name, right? And so like at one of my reunions, I wound up sitting next to this guy who I had a couple classes with. And he asked me, because I was really known for being involved in journalism. Mm-hmm. So he asked me, what paper I'm with now. And I said, I'm not a reporter, I'm a rabbi. And he gives me a big hug. And he says, a rabbi? I didn't even know you were Jewish. And then he tells me about how involved he is in the federation where he lived. And I had no idea that he was Jewish. Mm-hmm. It just wouldn't have necessarily come up. I mean, mm-hmm. like I said, people weren't in the closet, but they didn't wear their Jewishness on their sleeve either. So I think that, the community, not only in absolute numbers, because the undergraduate population is a little larger than it. How many undergrads are there now?
I think just short of 7,000.
Okay, so there were like 5,000 when I was there. Mm-hmm. So it's grown in absolute numbers, but I think it's also grown as a percentage of the population.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it seems, I was talking to Rabbi Rachel Gardner, who I assume you know, and sure. She had sort of kind of an offhand comment, which seems to me to be logical. People have different perspectives, which is that Rabbi White had he was really into this personal mentorship. And there was, there's a million people in DC who felt like Rabbi White was like their mentor, and that he loved this Jewish Catholic dialogue that was part of his role, but that he wasn't doing a ton to like build community in terms of getting students to really interact with each other and create Jewish spaces. And that was her perspective, because what she was saying is, since she's gotten here, when she got here in 2011, there was like, you couldn't get a minyan on Shabbat. And now in 2018, there's like 30 people at Shabbat every week. And there's this 200 person Jewish Facebook group. And so I wonder if there's also a sense of like people on campus are connecting more now than they might have, even if the numbers haven't changed for the past 10 years or something.
I mean, as a sympathetic outsider, I think so. I certainly, like following Georgetown Jewish Life on Facebook and so on and so forth, and occasionally getting emails either from campus ministry or from Rabbi Rachel. I do think that the level of activity is high. Mm-hmm. And I think that what she says about Rabbi White is actually accurate. I mean, it's like, when I say that Rabbi White and I had very different ideas of what it means to be a rabbi. And I don't mean that as a criticism. I think it's more analytical. In other words, there's often a tension between the needs of the individual and the needs of the community. Mm-hmm. And Rabbi White was 100% the needs of the individual. Mm-hmm. Some rabbis are 100% the needs of the community. Right. And I think, like my sort of ongoing refrain as a conservative rabbi is that, you have polarities and tension that you have to find some balance. Rabbi White was not about balance at all. He was about, as you put it, or as she put it, individual mentorship. And that's why there are people, who are fiercely loyal to him and his memory. And that's great. But he didn't build the community as much. And if you look at High Holidays, I mean, I suspect even still, maybe less, I don't know, maybe some of Rabbi White's sort of group aren't going there so much anymore. But, there was this whole group of people who their relationship was with Rabbi White, not with Georgetown.
Mm-hmm. Who would come to High Holiday services, yeah. like community members and alumni. Yeah. Well, it seems like Eric Smolson, who I don't know if you know, but he was telling me that he remembers holiday services being packed in Gaston Hall with Senator Carl Levin. He said he remembered was always there, and there are all these people in DC. Now we get I think 2/3 of Gaston Hall maybe, or half, or the whole downstairs, and it seems like there's higher of a percentage of students relative to outsiders. So it would seem like what you're saying is true, that maybe people who were Rabbi White fans stopped coming after he wasn't here anymore.
Yeah. Again, I don't know, but that's my perception, certainly.
Yeah. I wish someone had done this research just before he died a few years ago, because I know his brain was full of knowledge. But I've been doing a lot of digging into the university archives and looking at the Hoya and the Voice archives. Maybe I'll find some stuff that you wrote. There's less source material prior to the 60s, but there's stuff out there to be found. Once the 60s and 70s start, there's just this ballooning of statements and memos.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. Because I don't know what you know or what you don't know, but Carl Reiner went to Georgetown.
Mm-hmm. I guess I had forgotten that.
Yeah, I don't know if you could interview him, but it would be fascinating. It certainly would be fun.
Yeah. Well, he would have gone. What?
He was there during World War II. I think that the Army actually sent him to what was then, this was the Institute of Languages and Linguistics.
Wow. Let me see if I know anyone who knows him. That's a great idea. I haven't talked to anyone who went here prior to the 60s yet, just because they're harder to track down.
Sure.
It seems, my theory is, I know that, in the 30s, the first Jewish student was here in 1832, and then you have a very slight, you have a few students every few years for 100 years. And then by the 20s and 30s, there's more of a climate of anti-Semitism within the church, and there was a quota on campus in the 30s on Jews. But then by the 60s, there was it seems to be around 100 Jewish students when they hired a rabbi. So something happened in that interim where Jewish students started coming. And my theory thus far is that it was with World War II, there was a big influx of GIs coming here out on the GI Bill, and there was military training going on. And it seems like you would have been more likely to come here as a Jew as part of that wave than you would have been as a regular student. Sure.
But I think also, look, Nostra Aetate was in 65, Vatican II. So, I suspect that, you probably had, an expansion of Jewish life and Jewish students in the wake of Vatican II, where, where the church's position was just different vis-a-vis Jews and Judaism.
Certainly. And I have read that after they hired Rabbi White, just because we had a rabbi on campus, the Jewish population doubled within 5 years. I don't know exactly.
Absolutely. Like I said, even though in the end Rabbi White and I were not close, absent Rabbi White, I would not have come to Georgetown.
Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't have either, absent rabbi on campus.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Really, it's been really helpful to hear about your experiences and nice getting to know you. If there's anyone, I will look up Rich Shavakian, you said, and I'll see if I can find Carl Reiner as well. If there's anyone else you think that would be worth speaking with, it'd be great to know their names, or if if it comes to you later, you can email me.
Well, Rabbi Abramowitz taught in the theology department simultaneously with Rabbi White for a long time.
Yeah, actually, I have spoken with him on the phone.
Yeah. I doubt, my classmate, who's now Rabbi Ephraim Levin, but he was Frank when I was there.
Mm-hmm.
He's at Chabad at Penn. I mean, I don't know if he would talk to you, but you could try and track him down.
Oh, I'm sure he's on. That's a great idea. Thank you. Ephraim Levin. Okay.
Yeah. So now I get to ask you a question. So
Yes.
I don't know anything. This whole idea of senior thesis is very foreign to me. So what is it? Who are you writing it for?
So different departments have different policies around writing a sort of capstone paper. So
because I was in SFS, so we had nothing like that.
So so we have the Center for Jewish Civilization, which doesn't offer a major yet. Hopefully it will at someday, but it's a minor and certificate program. So I'm getting a major in government and a minor in Jewish civilization. And to complete the minor, I have to do this large, you pick a research project basically and do it over the course of the semester. And I mean, Jewish civilization is so broad that some people, like one of my classmates is writing on Jews in the Confederacy, and someone else is doing like, the Exodus narrative and the Black and the Jewish communities and how that informs. It's a broad spectrum. So I chose this topic. And so I'm writing, there's a particular structure for the department that I have to write it in, but I'm writing this because I think our community should know its story. And we're also approaching the 50th anniversary this fall of 1968 when Rabbi White was hired. And so there's going to be some 50th anniversary celebrations. So I'm working with Rabbi Rachel, and the hope is that part of my research can be part of how we celebrate our narrative in the fall, maybe make a video of it or something. So I don't know exactly how I'm going to do this, but I would certainly want to like publish it or circulate it or get it out there in addition to submitting it for my grade.
All right, great. Well, that sounds great. I'd love to see it when you finish.
Absolutely. I mean, it'll be end of April or early May, but I have your email and we'll totally send it to you.
Great. Okay, so what I will do, so within a couple of minutes after we finish this, Zoom is going to send me a link to a recording of this interview. Okay, so I will send that to you. I only have a limited amount of like free disk space on Zoom. Mm-hmm. So, I'll send you the link, and I would ask you to, download it fairly quickly and then let me know that you've downloaded it so I can go ahead and erase it.
To be honest, I've been taking, just since we're on my computer, I've been typing quickly, so I don't think I need the video because I have pretty good.
Okay. All right, great.
I really appreciate the offer, though, and it's good really good to talk to you face to face.
Great. All right. Appreciate it. All right. Good luck.
Well, thank you so much. Seriously, I really appreciate your time, and we'll
my pleasure.
Touch, I'm sure.
All right. Great.
Take care.
Bye-bye.